not our usual space. But on the other hand, the cookies and the hot chocolate are still the same, so that's all that counts. And the fantastic speakers, of course. So, as I say, welcome to the Water Without Borders panel event, Under Another Drop. And hopefully tonight you'll hear all about the wonders and perils of international research from our three panelists. I'm going to introduce them all and invite them to just stand up and turn around, and then they're just going to go through their presentations. We've asked them to speak for about 5-10 minutes and on a series of questions that we gave them beforehand, and then they'll come up and sit as a panel at the end and be able to answer any questions. So if there are any burning questions that you have on how to become involved in international work and international research, or if you want them to elucidate on some of the tantalizing stories I'm sure you'll hear tonight, then they can certainly oblige with that. And of course, we're always here until the coffee, hot chocolate and cookies run out. So without further ado, I'll introduce them in speaker order. And for those of you who are regulars here, you know that I always ask for something that no one else really knows about you. So I will be sharing that with you as well. So that's something else that you can think of while you're listening to their presentations. So first is Daniel Olsen. And he graduated from McMaster University in 2005. So he's back here in his alma mater, I suppose. He's got a Master's of Applied Science in Civil Engineering, and he worked on water and wastewater design projects at CH2M Hill in Toronto for 3 years, and at that time started a Toronto professional chapter of Engineers Without Borders, and then went on to join Engineers Without Borders and the Governance and Rural Infrastructure team in Ghana, and looked at engineering and problem solving and combining this with his passion for people and social change and development. So after 4 months in Ghana, he took on the role of team leader and managed a team over in Ghana, and they partnered with local government institutions and developed a management information system for enhanced evidence-based decision-making in water and sanitation. And as part of this, it was piloted in about 6 districts in Ghana, and since then it's actually been undertaken in and scaled up to all 170 districts in Ghana. So I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot about his Ghanaian experience as we go forward tonight. And he's now back with CH2M Hill in the Toronto office, and he's the operations leader and project manager in asset management and environmental assessment programs. So welcome, Dan. Perhaps you can stand up and turn around and face everyone. And while you do, I'll just let you know there's some wonderful news. Dan's wife is expecting, but the tidbit of information that you don't know about is apparently Dan can, and it's a university trick from, so if you were with him in McMaster University a long time ago, you probably know this already, but he can extend his stomach, and apparently it's larger than his wife's at the moment. I didn't dare ask him how far pregnant. I mean, if she's 8 months pregnant, I think this is a significant feat. 3 months pregnant, it might not be such a good boast. But anyway, we'll leave that bit up to Dan to share with us later. So Cherie Pagsoyan is from the University of Waterloo. Welcome. And she's an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering in Waterloo. And her research focuses around emerging contaminants, environmental simulations, and water and sanitation in developing regions. And she's been at the University of West Virginia working on multi-institutional and interdisciplinary projects on water, health, and sanitation in South Africa. And in 2008, she was the recipient of the Sonny Roden Memorial Scholarship awarded by the Virginia Water Environment Association. And in 2005, she was distinguished as the most outstanding faculty instructor of the College of Engineering in the University of Philippines. So she has professional consulting experience in environmental engineering as well, and she's also done work on sustainable land development, water, wastewater technologies, sewerage and sanitation, and environmental management system audits. So she's, again, a very well-rounded individual, and we appreciate you being here. Perhaps, Cherie, you can stand up and just say hello to everyone. And her little known, and in fact, unbelievable, I still think she's pulling my leg, is that her teenage daughter is actually in the audience with us. And I said she doesn't look a day over 20. So maybe you can wave and say hi. And finally, last but not least, probably the most well-known around these parts, as he's with UNU-INWEH as a senior advisor for the Water Health Nexus program. Chris Metcalf has a broad range of interests. He's at the University of Trent. He does a lot of research on environmental fate and effects of chemical contaminants. He's a professor, as I said, in Environmental and Resource Studies program at Trent, and he's led watershed management projects in Mexico and Ecuador, and has worked to increase research and ecosystem management capacity within institutions in Indonesia, Cuba, Argentina, and the Caribbean region. He's currently the director of the Institute for Watershed Science at Trent University, and this institute, in partnership with UNU-INWEH, is currently developing capacity for protecting sources of drinking water in remote Indigenous communities in Canada's north. So again, if you'll stand up, I'll welcome you. And I wasn't quite sure which would be more pertinent here, is whether the fact that he does all of his work down in Latin America, he's decided to take up salsa lessons, or the story of him, a little rowboat and a great white shark, but I'll let him again fill you in on that later. All right, so the only other person I have to introduce for the evening is my partner in crime, Dr. Sarah Dixon. Thank you. I was going to say, where did you go? So if you'd like to stand up. Sarah Dixon is the McMaster Director of Water Without Borders, and so we're the tag team for today. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Corinne Wallace. I'm with the UN University Institute for Water, Environment and Health, and welcome and enjoy. So Dan, why don't you come up? Thank you.
Do you want me to speak into the microphone? Or?
Yes, please.
I don't know if it's actually working.
It's not a microphone, it's for the podcast. If you miss anything, then you'll be able to hear it afterwards. You can read it with all those screens.
Okay. So I'll go quickly through share with you some of my experiences over the next 10 minutes. When we were asked to share about community water and sanitation, it got me thinking about the question, what does community actually mean? And when I reflected on this, to me, community meant such a broad thing. Geographically, community means so many different things, and also at different levels, community means so many different things. So I started to look back at my experience, and I started to think about on the ground who at the family level, I was working with a number of different families. And when I was working in Ghana with Engineers Without Borders, I stayed in a small town called Miampisam, and there was two families that lived in this. It wasn't even a town; it was just two families living close to next to a river. And on a daily basis, it was the woman that would go down to the river to pick up water on a daily basis, and this was the trek back from on a daily basis from the river. And it sort of got me to think, within this family unit, the people that were making the decisions were the women in terms of decisions based on water. And then my experience about community took me a little broader to looking at a number of the village or the towns that I was working in. When I was actually at McMaster University, I was a master's student. I was working with Dr. Brian Bates. I was working on a decision support system for rural water supply in a district in India, in Tamil Nadu. And this was a town that I was working with. And a very common water supply system within this town was it was a hilly area, so they'd have check dams that they would block off. And through the check dam, they would be able to transport water to larger storage tanks. And within the storage tanks, they would then have stand posts to feed into towards the different houses. And these were the community members that were working supplying the water for this town of about 300 people. And there was a water board that was making the decisions within the town. And the water board was about 10 people made up of about half women, half men. But they would have to manage the system, try to get the resources, the funding, and they would be responsible for making sure that this service was provided to this town. So the level of decision making within this water board of 10 people became a little more complex, and the decision making, the politics got a little bit more challenging in supporting this in this town. Next up, I was working in Ghana, and I was working with Engineers Without Borders in their governance and rural infrastructure team, and we were partnering with local government in Ghana. I was there for 2.5 years. And we were partnering and brainstorming and co-developing approaches to evidence-based decision-making through developing information systems for water and sanitation. And these are the people that we were working with within the district, and it's probably about 100,000 people. We're the district coordinating director, so the top bureaucrat within the district. And then the district planning officer, this is Ahmed, and he was actually over in Canada last year as part of our African leadership program, but he was a planning officer who would work with the different departments, the education department, the water and sanitation department, to look at, for the budget that came into the district, how do they divide those resources in order to deliver the service. And we also worked with the district chief executive. He was the one who was the elected official, who was the political figure. And so his decision-making process was very influenced by what he felt was a political advantage for himself. And then we were working with a number of different department heads. As I said, we were focusing on water and sanitation, but within the district, they were given a budget, and they had to divvy that between education, health, water, and sanitation. And we were supporting them through a planning process. So every year, they would have resources that would come into the district. Typically, 95% of their budget would come from national level of government or from donor agencies, and about 5% from the tax base. But they would have this pool of money, and they would have to make decisions in order to prioritize water and wastewater infrastructure. So it's getting from the town level of 300 to a level of 100,000 people, more complex decisions that needed to be made. And now back in Canada, I'm working actually with a colleague of mine, Dwight. He's in the room, Professor Dwight Howling. I think he teaches a course at McMaster University in wastewater design, but we're both working on environmental assessment. And this is called the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. And this is servicing up to 1 million people. And this has even more challenging decision-making process at the regional level because you have multiple different stakeholders that are involved. Basically, this water treatment plant treats all of the sewage, or most of the sewage from York region. They transport it down to Durham region and treat it at the plant. So you have multiple different stakeholders at different levels, right down on the ground, individual community members. You have the town of Ajax and the town of Pickering that are right on Lake Ontario that kind of don't look highly upon getting their sewage from York region. And then we're partnering with the regions at the same time. So going through this decision-making process for water and sanitation. So just the decision-making processes are becoming more complex as you get higher up. So that just sort of, to me, community means so many different things. It can mean a family level, but also working with multiple different stakeholders and trying to make decisions, and it becomes even more complex as you go up the chain. So one of the things that we were focusing on, especially within our work in Ghana, was like if we're doing research and we're trying to benefit essentially constituents on the ground, the importance of really understanding the system. And so when we dissected the system, we found a number of things. We understand that there's a number of key, theoretically, there's a number of key institutions or systems that exist within society. We have the private sector and public sector. And when we dissected the private sector, we realized that within the private sector, you have customers and clients, or people that are purchasing things from companies. And they typically hold the power in the decision-making processes. And in the public sector, in theory, it's the same thing. You ideally have a constituency that are paying taxes, that are voting in public officials, and the constituents hold the power in terms of the way that the public sector is making decisions. What we were finding in Ghana, where we observe, is that the private sector is not as strong. There's not as strong a private sector. And within the public sector, typically constituents, they do vote, but a lot of constituents are living in rural areas. And oftentimes, most of the money is not coming from constituents through taxes. They're oftentimes coming through donor agencies. That we sort of understood this power dynamic that existed when the public sector was very much our government officials that we were working on within the district were oftentimes more trying to cater towards the donors that were supplying the money, rather than trying to listen to constituents and work with constituents on the ground. And we found the same kind of system existed within the development sector. Oftentimes we were observing, working with a lot of non-government organizations, and not always the case, but oftentimes observing that beneficiaries weren't exactly included within the process of decision making. It was more the donors that were providing the funding. So trying to understand the system, we were embedding ourselves within the local government and really trying to dive deep into the system to understand where our interventions could have the most impact. Through my experience, when I was working in India, we were very much working at the implementation level on the ground. And I was working with, there was an NGO that we were working with, but also working with communities. And through my research, I was developing a decision support system for rural water supply. And I was working with a number of different constituents. But oftentimes I found that I was sort of working in my own headspace and wasn't really engaging the decision makers in the process. I was working with them, but I wasn't co-creating it with decision makers and develop my thesis. So I really missed out on sort of linking my decision support system to a decision-making process. So it really didn't become sustained. And I learned through this experience, and within Ghana, we were developing, again, we were working at the district level with the planning officer and trying to develop a decision support system for, again, water and sanitation in terms of prioritizing where boreholes should be dug. But this time we really co-created the process with our partners on the ground. And we were finding within their decision-making processes, there's obviously different influences from the political figures, from technocrats, from different departments, but trying to figure out how information can be used to more effectively to make decisions. And at the same time, we were trying to understand the dynamic at the national level of government in Ghana, where how the donors would interact with national level players and how the policy was really influencing decision-making that was taking place on the ground. So we were sort of working on these two fronts, trying to learn on the ground with our partners, but also observe why the limitations for positive change on the ground and how policy can influence that. And we're meeting with a number of officials at the national level with different agencies, such as the Canadian International Development Agency, different UN agencies, also with the national level departments to really articulate some of the challenges and to also look to scale some of the initiatives we were doing on the ground. And at the same time, trying to feed that program influence back down to the implementation level. So we had piloted a number of programs in 6 districts on the ground, and we worked with the national level government to scale that to all 170 districts in terms of a decision support system. So really, by engaging the entire system, we were able to find the points of influence. And so just to close off, a number of the key learnings that I've come away from my research and also my work with Engineers Without Borders is the importance of field level realities. I think one of the questions that was posed today was looking at the politics of the decision making and policy. But I found through my research is that really diving into the field level realities, engaging with partners on the ground and co-creating processes and really understanding the disincentives and the incentives and the different decision-making processes that they're under really enables you as a powerful tool to informing policy. Next, through my experience understanding there's politics at every level. And so from my experience working with families in a rural community and the decision-making process that they go through all the way up to the town level to a district level, at every single level is politics. And in order to have long-lasting sustainable change, you really have to understand the different, how decisions are made, who's making those decisions, and what's the dynamics of decision-making at every level. The last learning that I want to share is that my work in India, I found I was working a bit too independently. I was in my research bubble and focused on developing a tool and developing processes that I really didn't engage all the decision makers through that process and maybe limited the ability of the work that I was doing to have sustained institutional or systemic change. And in Ghana, one of the learnings that we found is that we were trying to tackle the entire system. We were trying to understand at the national level all the different donor agencies. What were their motivations? You had the Danish who were really interested in decentralization, so they were really influencing the local government act that was embedded within Ghana. You had the World Bank who's really focused on economic development. So you see how all these different players are trying to influence the system, and then you had all the different levels of government. So we're truly trying to understand again how all the different levels of government worked, and we were very ambitious trying to tackle the entire system. That I found that it's probably more important to set more realistic expectations. What is a key research question that you're trying to solve, and then focus on that question, understand the entire system, but focus on that question when conducting research. So that was 3 different learnings that I experienced through my work in India and Ghana and right now in Canada.